Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts, HB and LB. If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of MHM. Today, we are going to be talking about Yzma from Emperor's New Groove. And joining us today is a very special guest.
Yes. We have my friend Nicole, who is also known on Instagram as level_up_therapist. Nicole and I connected online because we are both nerdy people who are interested in mental health. So the official Nicole bio is that Nicole is a licensed clinical psychologist trained in cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. She opened her private practice in 2021 with the hope of using her clinical skills in conjunction with her love for all things geeky to help clients who struggle to respond to a more traditional therapy approach. Nicole has contributed to podcasts and pop culture panels specifically on how to incorporate geek culture into the therapeutic process. Nicole identifies as a proud geek with a love for many different fandoms, including Disney. So that is why we have you on here today to talk about Yzma.
And thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm excited to have you. It's rare that we come across like a self-proclaimed geeky therapist. So this is really, really cool. And obviously pretty much what our podcast is centered around. So I'm really excited to have you on.
And we've been trying to make it very clear, especially with our villain season, that we are not professionals in the psychology field. So when we talk about villains and use words like narcissism and other like, you know, I guess sort of like buzzwords,
clinical terminology.
We are not diagnosing. We are just kind of using that as ways to describe the villain. So it's nice to have someone who is actually sort of more has those credentials on here.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. But to kick us off, Nicole, would you be so kind as to give us a synopsis of The Emperor's New Groove?
Absolutely. So the movie is all about Emperor Kuzco, who, when we first meet him, seems like a very selfish, spoiled little brat of an emperor. We see him basically trying to run his empire like a playground. He's thinking about buying up all the land, making a summer home on this one hill where one of the characters, Pacha, lives, which doesn't sit too well with Pacha very much. And Yzma was Kuzco's advisor, but it kind of seemed that she wanted more so to be the emperor rather than advise the emperor. And because she was essentially trying to do his duties, he fired her, which caused her to feel like she needed to kill Kuzco, but fails spectacularly and turns him into a llama instead. And this whole movie is basically about Kuzco and Pacha trying to get back to his palace, while Yzma and my favorite character, KRONK, are trying to track him down and finish the job.
It's a great synopsis.
Thank you. Yes, a fantastic synopsis. Got all the major points. For those who may not remember, also, this movie came out in December of 2000. It's almost 24 years old, and that is wild to me. That's I don't even know how to feel about that.
So old.
Yeah.
Right? Well, and
it
it's
came
weird
out
to
when
me.
I was 10.
Yeah, and it's weird to me because this
actually 11. I was 11. Sorry.
I was 12.
Oh, in December. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I was 5, so I did not see it in theaters. I don't think.
Yeah, Marissa's young.
I just a little bit.
Ow.
It doesn't feel like it though. I'm turning 29 next month, and I'm like, well, because I was turning 25 in 2020, so the pandemic kind of like skewed all of that. So in my brain, I still feel like I'm turning 25, even though I don't feel 25 in my soul. I do feel 30, and I'm ready to be 30. That's a whole other thing. We're not talking about Marissa's existential crisis. We are here to talk about Emperor's New Groove. So, like I said, I didn't see it in theaters. To me, it feels older, probably because older, excuse me. It feels newer. Yeah, thank you. Because the animation I don't know, the animation, the story, the humor just feels a lot more mature than what I'm used to, like older, quote unquote, older Disney was doing. But Nicole, when was your first time seeing this movie?
I wish I could say I remember. I want to say that I saw it in theaters because I remember seeing like the trailers for it and being like, wow, this looks like it's going to be a really fun movie. And if I do remember correctly, I went to the movies and saw it with friends. But even now, like it's one of those movies, like it's just, it feels so timeless. When you were talking about how you could quote it and stuff like that, like a good friend of mine and me will constantly share reels on Instagram of like Emperor's New Groove quotes and things like that. Specifically the pull the lever, KRONK, because that is, you know, that's iconic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to say, yeah, I probably saw it when I was 12 when it first came out.
Wow. Yeah. And have you
Yeah.
seen it since, like before the purposes of this podcast, or was
Oh yeah, it
that?
used to be one of those movies. I had it on, and again, I'm dating myself, VHS.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And would watch it pretty regularly. And then even now as an adult, like every now and again, you know, something will remind me of it and I'll go back and I'll watch it. But I do like that we are doing this as a podcast because it gave me an excuse to go back and watch it again.
Yeah.
That's why I love this podcast. I haven't seen this movie since I was a child. It's a very quotable movie. So I think that in the ways that I have quoted it throughout my life, I still think that because I was watching it today and I was like, yeah, I mean, I haven't seen this in years. And I sent my sister a Snapchat of like one of the scenes and said that. I was like, I haven't seen this probably since we were kids. And the exact quote she sent back to me was, pull the lever, KRONK, wrong lever. So I think that's just like goes to say it's one of the most iconic lines of a Disney villain, you know. They all have one and that's hers.
That's hers. Although I would like to think the one that for me stands out is the it is no concern of mine whether you and your family have, what was it again? Food. You really should have thought about that before
That one
you
is pretty good.
presents. Next,
Yeah.
take him away. Like, but anyway, so let's get into a little bit of Yzma and her character. So Yzma, for those who haven't seen the movie in a really long time or just haven't ever, to me, she's one of those villains that is really evil in the sense that like she tries to poison someone and fantasizes about all of these ways to kill a person so that she can usurp and take the throne. But what I thought was kind of interesting was that, and I hadn't noticed it before, but there's this kind of throwaway line about how she kind of raised Cusco.
Yeah. Thought that was interesting.
But he does not treat her as any kind of maternal figure in any kind of way. And so I was curious what your guys' like thoughts and perspectives were on that.
I actually wrote that down too, because when I heard her say that, it was very fascinating to me because it's like, okay, so she's been around so long that she feels that she practically raised Cusco. I'm like, how egotistical is that you feel that you practically raised someone that does not reciprocate this feeling whatsoever. And I think this lends in, you're going to hear me throw around the word narcissism a lot in here because Yzma is, to me, the very definition of it. I feel like in that moment, especially because, you know, that line comes out after she gets fired by Cusco. And it's that very resentful kind of like, how could he do this to me? It's very much a narcissistic injury, like a blow to her ego in such a way that it's causing her to have such a strong reaction. And yeah, I mean, just the way that she views the relationship is certainly not the way that Cusco sees it.
What I think is interesting about that is that Cusco is equally as narcissistic. So I think that it also would make sense if she did have a role in his upbringing, that he would come out the way that he did, just like without a care for anyone else besides himself. And I don't think that she did raise him in the maternal sense of like she had to take care of him. I think that she was just kind of in charge of overseeing his duties as her job, right? And like perhaps she's been doing this job for the previous emperor, you know, whatever that may be. And so to me, I think it's kind of funny that he mirrors her behavior. Also, like, he's just as much of a villain at the beginning of this movie as she is.
Oh, 100%. Everyone besides Pacha. And we talked a little bit about this in our What Makes a Villain episode, but everyone in that movie kind of sucks a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. So I guess that kind of reveals a little bit behind possibly Yzma's like background and motivation. Was there anything else maybe you guys picked up on that might contribute to that?
It's so strange because she doesn't really have that much of a background. That's the thing. Like when I think of villains and, you know, good villains and whatever, they usually have like some sort of a backstory to go along with like putting the pieces together as to why they are the way that they are. And with Yzma, it's very recent, like, you know, this, you know, emperor that she's advising fires her, and this is why she is the way that she is. But what happened to you to make you this way, that you felt that the only acceptable course of action to that is I need to kill this guy?
Yes. And why does she have a secret lab? Why does she have a comically new sort of, you know, like grunt guy, which is KRONK in the portion of the story that we see is KRONK, but it sounds like he's new, and it sounds like she goes through a lot of them all the time. So it's just really interesting that it seems to sort of be, there is more story there. We just don't know what it is, that she has all of these things, like, and she has all the potions, and she has all of this stuff, and Cusco knows about it because he's like, I'll just have, like, when he's in his llama form, he's like, yeah, I'll just go to her secret lab and change myself back. And it's like, okay, so this is like all known information. Like, why? Where did it come from? I want to know. I want more of that, you know?
I will say though, because I think we had the same critique for King Magnifico from the Wish movie, that we wanted more backstory because it was too vague. But I do think that this movie is so well written that while we don't get a lot of her backstory, we're not like wondering why, you know, like we can
she is
together.
She is so steadfast in her character and who she is through the whole movie. She doesn't go through a transformation like King Magnifico does, right?
Yeah.
So like Yzma from the very get-go is like, she's clearly trying to take the role of emperor and behave as emperor, and has this like chip on her shoulder and all. It's like, she has like a clear through line. And so like, she doesn't go through this change to become the villain, and we need to know why. It's just that she kind of starts as the villain, and then something incites an incident that makes her want to kill Cusco, and then the plot, you know, evolves from there. So yeah,
that makes sense. I'm going to throw this question to our clinical psychologist in the room. What personality traits, other than narcissism, like you said, might you contribute or attribute to this character?
So a lot of it falls in the realm of narcissism with her. She has this very high sense of self-importance. We heard that when we were talking about the line of like, I practically raised him. Like, she sees herself as being a very important person in Cusco's life. She expects to be seen as superior. So she's trying to be emperor, essentially. We can see that she wants power. She's very preoccupied with that fantasy of power too, you know? So again, like from the moment that she's fired and then I'm going to kill Cusco, like it's very clear that she's doing it, not just because she feels slighted, but because she wants to be in charge. And she very much looks down on others. So that one line that you mentioned, like, I don't, you know, really care if you guys need food or anything.
Like you're a
she
peasant.
even calls them, I think she even calls them like meaningless peasants. Like, that's how little she thinks of people. And she expects others to pretty much do what she wants without question. So we see that with KRONK, like, I'm telling you to do this, so just do this and don't ask questions. And KRONK, of course, being KRONK, like, is like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever you say, Yzma. She very much is an opportunist. She takes advantage of others to get what she wants. Again, KRONK. KRONK is not, you know, the smartest character that we've come across. And I believe that Yzma is very well aware of that and is taking advantage of that. She really doesn't care about the wants and needs of others, like whatsoever. She can't even recognize it, I feel like. And again, we see even with all of that, she's still very envious of others. So she's very envious of Cusco and, you know, his power. And probably like all of us saw him as like this really selfish brat and didn't deserve to be the emperor. And of course, I mean, you know, you don't have to be a psychologist to see that she's very arrogant and very conceited in her appearance. Like she thinks that she's, you know, gorgeous and all this stuff. And, you know, you take one look at Yzma and you're like, well, no, but you do you. You do you.
Yeah. She's described as like revolting, I think, at one point. It's like, wow, brutal.
So yeah, so those, and that all falls under the category of what we would call like a narcissistic personality disorder, which, you know, again, like it's so hard, like as a psychologist, I do like to watch these things. I like to analyze, I like to get, and again, I like that background information to get a better sense of what it is that I'm seeing. And with Yzma, I just don't have that, but I don't feel like I need it so much because it's so in your face that it's, you know, as I was going through, because when I agreed to do this podcast initially, I was like, oh man, I don't even know what I'm going to say because she doesn't have a lot of background. And then literally within like 10 minutes, I'm like, narcissist.
Yes. Yeah. Very much power hungry, really thinks very highly of herself. And then, yeah, when she thinks Cusco's dead and she takes over at his funeral, she's like, well, he's not getting any deader. And then just they paint everything purple and she plasters her face over everything. And it definitely is that she doesn't want to become emperor for the good of the people. She wants to be emperor for herself and for the power that comes with the title. Yeah, she's not a good person. So for me, I don't see much that can be redeemable. And I'd like to think something that HB and I talk about a lot is a fate worse than death. And I think she gets a fate worse than death in this one.
Yeah.
It's the very definition of karma. Like you turned this guy into a llama and he had an amazing redemption arc.
Yes.
And now your fate is you have to live as a cat, which, I mean, to be fair, there is worse fates than that, I suppose. But for her, that's karmic justice.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys have watched KRONK's New Groove. That's the sequel to this movie. She is in it, and she, between the events of like the first movie and the second, she has been trying to turn herself back into a human, but she has failed. And so she's like a cat human hybrid. So she has like, it's Yzma with cat ears and a giant tail. And I thought that was really interesting too. My only issue is that sometimes we get some anti-cat propaganda. And so my small little note about that is the correlation between villain turns into a cat. Cats are evil, but I'd like to think more so that it's just a nod to Eartha Kitt, who's the voice of Yzma, her being Catwoman in like a Batman variation. And so they're like, yeah, let's make her a cat.
Yeah, I think it's both. But I also think there was juxtaposition in that she was this like big, powerful, evil person and got turned into something cute and fluffy. I think that too.
Yeah.
That juxtaposition, rather than like seeing the cat as something evil, more like, oh, it's a kitty. And, you know, she doesn't want to be looked at like that, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I will say KRONK is just so sweet throughout the whole thing. And yeah, he is definitely getting taken advantage of like the entire movie, but he, whether it's just through like ignorance or, you know, whatever's going on with him, he's just so nice that I also had thoughts or questions about his whole, you know, shoulder angel and shoulder devil and like the the journey he goes on to make new and better choices.
Well, yeah, like what is his story? Like how did he become a super villain's like grunt man? Because he's clearly not evil, right?
No.
I would say he's not.
No.
he's just doing what Yzma tells him to do.
Like, how did he get there? Did he think it was like a different job interview? And then he was like, yeah. Or maybe he thought he was going to be a cook, because I love how much he loves cooking. Every time they showed him cooking or in a kitchen, I was like, this is really precious. I actually really love this a lot.
He is
and like,
so sweet. Yeah.
It
at the
broke my
dinner.
heart when Yzma told him, I never liked your spinach puffs. And he's just
Right.
like, and I'm like, that is like the worst. That's the most evil thing that somebody could ever do.
Yeah.
Poisoning Cusco, turning him into a llama. Telling KRONK that she didn't like his spinach puffs. So evil. Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
In the sequel, KRONK's New Groove, they do kind of go into his backstory, and a lot of it is cooking related, but for the life of me, I can't remember any specific details about like what he was doing or how he at least got into the position of being Yzma's right-hand man. But I do know that there's like we meet like his father who disapproves of his whole dream to be a cook and a chef, and then we meet like an old love interest who's on the opposing team because now they're in a cooking competition. It's a whole thing, but the kids are in it. Pacha's kids are in it. It's really cute. Yeah, anyway, watch it if you can. There was a TV show. Do you guys remember the TV show?
No.
There was an Emperor's New Groove TV show, and like Cusco's like going to college or going to high school or something, and he has to learn how to like be one of the people basically. So it's called like Emperor's New School. Yeah.
Oh, I did hear of that.
Mhm. That also ran, I think, from the early 2000s, like around the same time they were doing like the Lilo and Stitch show and the Hercules show, and I think Timon and Pumbaa
Never
had a
watched
show.
any of that.
Little Mermaid had a show. Like that was the trend when we were kids, was like all of these famous Disney characters got turned either into a straight to DVD sequel or had their own TV shows on Disney Junior.
Both.
Or both.
Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of the direction that Marvel's not now taking, and they're, owned by Disney now too. Like we had the movies, but now they're doing more TV show type things as well. So maybe it's just a trend with Disney.
Maybe. You'd think they would have learned how to do it better by now. Anyway.
But we digress.
We digress.
Yes.
Staying on topic. On topic.
But I'm a purist. I'm the watch the first one, and that's the only one I stand by as canon. So in terms of Disney films that came out when I was a child, thank you. That's what I'm talking about.
I have thoughts about that, but it's fine. Moving on. I talked a little bit about their background and motivations, personality traits. We touched a little bit on their relationships, but one of the questions that we're exploring this season is how do their relationships with other characters, whether they be the heroes, allies, or minions, reflect their mental state? I think you really touched on it, Nicole, that she treats people terribly. She treats them all as pawns to further her gain.
The only time I saw her interact with anybody in a positive way is when all of the guards get turned into animals, and the one's like, I've been turned into a cow. Can I go home? And she's like, you're excused. That was like the only time I think I saw her be nice to anybody.
Yeah. Actually, that's pretty accurate. Because I was trying to think. She's like cordial enough with Cusco when she invites him to dinner, but it's super awkward.
Especially because that she's intending to poison him. So you can tell that it's an act and she's being completely fake.
Yeah, totally. KRONK, she's just kind of belittling too.
Yeah, also, there's even a quote that she says to KRONK at one point where she says, you're a big stupid monkey named KRONK. And that's when she goes into the whole and I never liked your spinach puffs. And it's like,
yeah,
why would you be like that to this man?
No, who all he has done is carried you and cooked for you and all
literally
you.
Yeah. Oh gosh. But we love KRONK. She's also really rude to Pacha's wife, and I can't believe I'm forgetting her name because I love her so much. Like the scene when Pacha comes home, what was it?
I thought it was Chichka, but that might be wrong.
I can't remember now for the life of me.
Yeah, I'm blinking, and I'd look it up, but my computer will explode. Anyway, the scene when Pacha comes home and he lies that he didn't get to see the Emperor because he doesn't want to tell her the truth. And she gets all flustered and she gets all angry, and he's like, think of the baby. She's like, I'm fine. I need to go wash something. She copes by cleaning. I'm like, I see so much of myself in you. She's funny. And she can see also right through Yzma and KRONK's act too, which I thought was really funny and clever, and the way that she goes about getting them out of the house and trapping them and things like that was really
Pacha being like, they can handle themselves. I thought that was really
So
Solid.
sweet. So sweet.
Yeah.
I love their relationship. What about, because Cusco is, like you said, a little bit of a villain. So I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are as far as like how he interacts with people as a reflection of what's going on inside.
Again, like right in the beginning, you see that he doesn't really care about other people. You know, he cares about himself and what he can gain. You know, talking that interaction that he has with Pacha right in the beginning, where he's like, "Hey, tell me about, you know, your hill and what it's like." And Pacha's giving him this really beautiful story about how when the sun hits it just right, the hills sing and all this stuff. And then Cusco's like, "Great, so this is where I'm going to build my beach house." And
Mhm.
you know, does not even care that Pacha's like, "Hey, like people live here, like you can't just do this." And he's like, "Well, I'm the emperor, I can do what I want." So in a way, like when he gets turned into a llama, I'm kind of like, well, you kind of had that coming. Like you don't really care about, you know, the people that you're ruling over. I believe he throws an old man out of a window just for,
Yeah.
I forget what the man did, but he just threw him out a window.
You threw off my groove.
Threw off my groove.
Yeah.
You
I
threw off
should
the
have known
Emperor's
that.
groove. Yeah.
And then he and that poor old man is like, no, I deserved it. It was my fault. You know,
Poor
like, so what have
guy.
you done to these people that they actually believe that they were in the wrong?
Yeah.
So it kind of not surprising that what happened to him. But what's cool about it is that he was able to use that experience and turn it into a redemption arc where you start to, you know, kind of like, all right, like he's not that bad. He
Yeah.
just needed
And
the
it
right
wasn't,
person to guide him.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And it wasn't like an overnight thing either, which I think is like true to character and a redemption arc. Is like Pacha, obviously the perfect person for him to be stuck with, because the amount of
So patient.
patience that that man has and the amount of selflessness, like the amount of times Pacha put himself in danger and risked himself to benefit Cusco, who had clearly betrayed him over and over and over again, just out of the kindness of his own heart, but also out of his own motivations of, I think I can change him, which I think is interesting. Right?
It's
Like,
awesome.
I can change this
I
man.
can fix him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I didn't think about until I said it out loud. But I think he really, truly, you know, he said like there's a little bit of good in everyone. And so he saw good in Cusco. He was just like, I need to figure out how to get it out, and maybe a little torture walking through this jungle on the way back to the palace will help us get there, you know. And it did.
And it
They're
did.
bonding.
Mhm.
But I think what got them there, I think what's interesting that what got them there is Cusco felt betrayed by Yzma,
Mhm.
because I don't think that Cusco would have had the same redemption arc that he had he not felt betrayed by her, which I think is interesting because he's the one who fired her and put her in a specific position. Like, even though she was clearly behaving outside of, like, acting out of hand by behaving like the emperor when she is not the emperor, kind of like taking his job a little bit, he still fired her, which gives her a motivation to dislike him. But because of his own, the way that he views the world, he just thought she'll get over it and move on, right? Like, she's fired, this is through, we'll keep moving forward. And so like he had to go through finding out that they were trying to kill him, and that the fact that he's a llama is an accident. He had to see that for himself to sort of be humbled maybe a little bit and sort of realize like, oh, these aren't the people who I thought they were, and I just hurt someone who's actively been trying to help me, and I called him a liar, you know. So yeah.
That whole scene to me feels very representative of how accurate it is when you're trying to help a friend. Like, you can only help them so much, but you can't heal them. Like, there are things that they have to choose and do for themselves in order for change to happen. But I do like how patient Pacha was with him, and he could have been really mean and nasty right back, but he wasn't. He was just like really disappointed, you know. He's such a dad. He was just such a dad in every aspect to to Cusco, and I do really love their relationship and how all of that went down.
And that's kind of how the therapeutic process works in general. Like, people come to us looking for help and all that kind of stuff. And, we can guide and we can give you all the tools and tips and tricks in the book, but ultimately you're the one who has to use them. You're the one that has to elicit that change. We're only here to guide you along the way. So in a way, yes, Pacha is very much a dad, but I also think he's very much a therapist as well.
Yeah.
And I like that after that scene, when Cusco realizes that Yzma and KRONK were trying to kill him and he's crying out for Pacha and Pacha's nowhere to be found. And then they go into the llama herd there and Pacha's sitting there waiting for him, almost as if he knew that Cusco was going to figure it out, come to his senses. And he's like, I'm still here. I'm mad, but I'm still here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was great. And yeah, thank you for pointing out the similarities to like the therapeutic process. I think that's also very, very accurate. And I think something a lot of people might not understand about therapy, I think I've heard it both ways. Like some people will go to therapy thinking a therapist is going to fix their life, solve their problems. And then on the other hand, I've heard people being like, I'm not going to go to a therapist because they're not going to fix anything. I'm like, well, that's kind of the point. They just kind of give you the tools and resources for you to make changes in your own life because you're the one in control, right? You're the only one that can do all of these things. So yeah.
One of my trademark phrases in therapy is I can't work harder than you do. So if I find myself working harder, it's one of those things where like now I'm questioning, like, why is it that I'm trying to elicit change more so than you are trying to do so? What is going on there? I wish I had a magic wand and could just fix everything, but I'd be out of a job if that was so yeah, it really is, it is a collaborative type of an effort, but ultimately you as the patient or the client has to be willing to do the work in order to elicit that change. I can just sit here and be the cheerleader in the background saying, yay, go you, but I can't do the work for you.
Yeah. Speaking of redemption arcs a little bit too, I think that let's pretend that KRONK's show or movie isn't a thing. And I think that by the movie ending the way that it did, not only with a fate worse than death for Yzma, but also the fact that she's what do they call them? Like it's like a Boy Scout, but like a chestnut, whatever.
The chipmunk.
Chipmunk.
God. It was they were chipmunks, yeah, but there was a squad. What did they call themselves?
I don't remember, but I do think
the junior chipmunks.
Junior chipmunks. Okay, so I think that her being part of the I think that her being part of the junior chipmunks at the end is also the beginning of a redemption arc for her. She's softening because, well, she has no other choice but to soften because she has no control anymore. But
she's a cat
because of being in KRONK's presence, who is really at his heart a good person also, like by being under his influence, she kind of is forced to soften up a little bit, which I thought was kind of cool too.
And I think part of it is too that she needs him at this point. Like throughout the movie, like, yeah, she needed him to be her muscle essentially, but now she needs him probably more so for survival now. She's not going to survive as a cat, just, especially the way that her personality is. Nobody's going to take her in. It doesn't matter that she's a cat and cute and cuddly.
I do like how
you're an asshole,
Yeah. I do like how that flips of like how she used to rely on people, just seeing them as pawns, pieces that she can throw away or use to her advantage. And now she has to rely on them in a completely different way out of necessity and out of survival and for her overall well-being, not just striving for power. So that is a fun little twist. Yeah.
It's almost like KRONK was very dependent on her in the beginning. And now, like you said, the roles are reversed and she's now dependent on him just for, basic survival. KRONK, in the beginning, was probably looking at like, this is a job, I need this job. So he's very dependent on her for that. But now the roles are reversed, which is, again, maybe a bit of that fate worse than death type of thing that we've been talking about as well.
What more would you guys need to see in order for her redemption to like really stick and convince you that she's changed?
An apology would be a great start.
Yeah, fair.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, maybe something along the lines of like what Cusco went through, it may, in the beginning, like it could still be like a lot of that denial about like, you know, nobody would do this to me, like, and I'm going to be able to change back. But maybe palling around with KRONK for a while might change her views on things and, soften her up a little bit. I definitely would need to see some humility out of her, some recognition that, you know, her behavior is not okay. Recognizing how her behavior could be hurting other people. I don't know if it's possible for her, though. I think she's so stuck in her ways that I think if she, and I haven't seen KRONK's new groove, so I'm not sure how it goes, but I don't see her, like, even if she reverts back to a human, I don't see her not falling back into those same patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also, without going into the redemption arc cycle, I do think there's something fun about a villain who is bad at being a villain, which we've kind of talked about a little bit before, but not too much, is that, she obviously needs these right-hand men, right-hand people, these helpers to help her carry out any of her plans because she's always had one, right? Like with the way that they introduce KRONK. And so and obviously KRONK is introduced as being a bit flighty and naive and not really knowing what he's doing, but them working together they always miss the mark. And so I think I don't think this is redemption, but I do think there is something to be said about continually missing the mark no matter how hard she tries. Like no matter what it is, like she continues to fail at whatever it is that her evil plan is. It's kind of like if you ever watched the show Invader Zim, which is one of my favorite
Yes.
TV shows of all time.
Such a good show.
It's such a good show. It was only one season on Nickelodeon, but it's basically about this alien who is trying to take over the world, but he's really bad at taking over the world. And so it's just like, it's so fun to watch him fail because he's not a good villain. He's just like really, really bad at what he does. And so that it kind of reminds me of that, of her like consistently, not that she did this in the movie, but like I can imagine that as part of her future is like consistently trying and failing and just going through this cycle of like, well, I guess I will never be a good villain or a bad, like she's bad at being a villain, if that makes sense.
I now
The
can't
terms
stop.
get mixed up.
I now can't stop seeing KRONK as Gur. Like it's the
Yeah,
parallel
right.
there works so very well. Like you have the little henchman that's very spacey and flighty and not very good at his job either.
Yeah, Gur is one of my favorite all-time characters in anything ever.
Very cute. Yeah. Something that had come up for me when we were talking about all of this was Yzma quote unquote practically raising Cusco and her feeling slighted and jaded that he doesn't appreciate her more, or obviously he fires her and she's like, after everything I've done for you. And that struck a chord with me watching this for the purposes of this podcast because I have a mother who was very similar. So we've talked a little bit about like Yzma's redemption and what she can do for change, but like you said, Nicole, the chances of her doing that probably very slim. So I'm curious what your encouragement might be to someone who has an Yzma in their life.
Ooh, put me on the spot with that one. I guess honestly, it's just to kind of recognize that the capacity for change is very minimal. A lot of times we talk about acceptance in therapy, especially with acceptance and commitment therapy, and learning to accept situations for what they are. Doesn't mean that we have to be okay with it. Doesn't mean that we condone it in any way, shape, or form. It's just accepting the fact that things are what they are and people are who they are. And nothing we're going to be able to do is going to change that. We can't control them, but we can control ourselves. And so my advice would be let's learn how to accept the situation for what it is rather than stress about things that we can't change, and change aspects in our life that are going to help us better deal with this. And if that means that if you have somebody in your life that is like this and it is causing you significant distress, maybe that means that we need to change some things in our own life to have less interaction with this person. If as long as that's possible. You know, some people, you know, if we're talking about like younger kids and whatnot, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. But really, that's where I would start, is like learning how to accept that this is just who this person is and nothing we do is going to be able to change it. So what can we do for ourselves to protect ourselves moving forward?
Yeah, thank you for that. 100%. I agree. And that's kind of the journey I had to go on, and I'm still on it, of like kind of the 5 stages of grief as far as my relationship with my mom goes, you know, being in a lot of denial, like, and especially growing up in spaces that were like, oh, she's your mom, she loves you, she's just expressing it in a different way. And I'm like, by calling me these names and saying these things about me to my face, I don't know. Bargaining, you know, like, if and this is where the perfectionism and the anxiety came in, was if I just do X, Y, and Z and become the perfect daughter, then she'll love me, you know. Anger, something I'm still working through. Grieving the parent I didn't have and the parent that I do have, and whatever futures were not on my table because of said upbringing. And I remember there was a point in my early 20s where I had just started therapy for the first time in secret. It was a whole thing. Then they found out. That was a whole thing. Anyway, and really being stuck in that, like, but she's my mom. Like, she should be more caring. She should be blah, blah, blah. I should get an apology. And I was really stuck in that for a really long time, until I realized that, like, waiting on an apology from her is like still letting her have power over my healing journey and my growth and my development. And that's how I kind of got into this position in the first place. Was, you know, when you're a kid, you don't have a lot of autonomy and the perspective and experience to have these thoughts. But yeah, it hit a point where I was like, I don't need to wait on her to acknowledge and accept what she did, as much as it would make me feel better. But I'm tired of waiting and letting her have that power over me, and I'm ready to move on. And that was like the catalyst for my healing journey and growth, was, like you said, just really like taking back my power and finding what was within my control to just, yeah, move forward.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. That's so terrible. And thank you for sharing that. Like, super, super proud of you for making movies.
Thank you. No, and thank you for your wisdom and insight too, because, you know, as much as I can share my process, I can only share it from this perspective. But having like that outside kind of, I don't know, not simplifying it as if you were like dumbing it down, but really just like consolidating the last 20 years of my life into what you had said, makes it a little bit more palatable and understandable.
And I like that you mentioned grief, because a lot of people think with grief, it's really only centered around like a death or something like that. But it really can be just the loss of anything. And it could be the loss of a parental relationship, much like that. And it's important to remember that even when we reach the acceptance stage, and I always say when, because we do get there eventually. I am a hopeless optimist. But even when we reach the acceptance stage, that doesn't mean that we're not still going to experience all those other feelings as well, that anger, that depression. We might still be in some denial and all that kind of stuff. And that's okay too. That's part of the process. We can still get to that stage where we recognize this is just how things are. And it's also okay to still have these feelings as well.
That both and.
Yeah.
Something.
And it's not linear.
It is definitely not linear.
It's not. I just had a whole conversation, a whole session with my therapist about how healing is not linear. Things kind of repeat until you change something to end that cycle. It's you know, it's not easy, but it's definitely worth it. And something that she had said to me was like, it's very hard and uncomfortable right now, but think of how much more discomfort you'll have if you stay here, you know? And that was like a big light bulb moment for me. Like, damn, it's good. That's good.
So Nicole, would you advise us to not behave how Pacha behaved then when it came to Cusco's behavior?
I mean, that's where I come into the sense of like, you know, him as a dad or even as a therapist. Like for Cusco, I feel like if Cusco was coming in for therapy, if he got to that point where he felt like he could benefit from it, there does seem to be some redeeming qualities for him. But I would also encourage people to just be like, you know what, you got to protect your own energy. And so if you have a Cusco in your life that it's just like really just doesn't sit well with you, you know, maybe you don't act like Pacha. You got to do what's best for you in that situation. And Pacha had motives as well. Like his motive was, I want to help you change so that I get to keep my hill. So I would say like in that aspect, like if you're trying to change somebody's behavior in order to get a more desirable outcome for yourself, if you have the patience, go for it, but also recognize that sometimes people just don't want to change.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. And then I also like the comparison of him to a therapist is like the reason that he was able to work with Cusco on the level that he did is because of that relationship.
Yeah. He's not, you know, Cusco wasn't so set in his ways that there wasn't some sort of a redeeming quality about him. Like we sometimes get people in therapy that just are just a wall. I work with a lot of children and adolescents, and I absolutely love when I get teenage boys as clients because they come into sessions and they immediately are just sitting there, arms crossed, like, I'm not talking to you. I want nothing to do with you. And then when I tell them the type of therapy that I do and like the things that I'm interested in and what I incorporate into therapy, it's so cool to see like their arms kind of unfold. They get a little bit more curious about it. I feel like Cusco would be very much like that, like a teenage boy in therapy where he's just like, I'm not doing it. I'm only here because my parents told me I need to be here. I'm not talking to you. But when you find that common ground, that's when you start to see the magic happen a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you imagine Yzma in therapy?
Yzma would be one of those clients that I'd be canceling left and right. I would be like, I don't want to see you. You drive me nuts. There are, and that is the nature of it. Like, just to give some behind the scenes of being a therapist, like with personality disordered individuals, they are so hard to work with because they are constantly working against us. They're so resistant to change, and you need to have the patience of a saint to work with them. And you know, we are often told when we go through grad school, if you're going to be working with personality disordered clients, probably don't have more than 2 on your caseload at any given time, just because of how draining it can be. And this is not a knock on anybody that's out there that might have a personality disorder. We love you guys. We very much do. You know you're difficult though, you know, or else you wouldn't be in therapy. If you didn't know how difficult, you wouldn't be in therapy.
This is true. And that's the first step.
Yes. Yes.
Awareness.
You recognize that your behavior is not okay and you are actively working to change it. But so Yzma would be one of those clients. Like she does not strike me as somebody that has any sorts of goals in mind other than her own selfish goals. She doesn't really want to do anything to change her behavior. She's very content with who she is and does not feel that she needs to change anything about herself. So for me, I'd be like, I don't even know what I'm doing here other than collecting a paycheck.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair. Yeah. And do you guys have any other notes about Yzma or anything else you want to say before I jump into like some fun facts about her?
I didn't have anything else other than like her thinking is very black and white. It's very all or none. So again, like, you know, rather than just accepting that she got fired and just being like, all right, like, let me go look for a new job. Like immediately it's like, I have to go kill Cusco.
I have to murder someone.
I have to murder somebody because how dare he? And so it's very clear to me that she is not a fan of being rejected whatsoever. She can't handle that. And again, that makes me wonder, like, what happened to you? Like, were you abandoned? What happened that made you so fearful of rejection that you now have this such extreme type of thinking? But those
yeah. And I also want to know where she learned alchemy because she can create all of these potions and she seems like a very educated person. But yeah, just little things here and there I'd like to learn. I'd like to learn more about. Yeah.
I also think her design is so fascinating, like the way that she's animated. Her boobs, especially. I don't know if anyone noticed how like low and pointy her boobs were, but I was constantly looking for them. Like, where are they this time? Like, what?
Somehow they get like lower as the movie goes on, I feel like.
It's just in some angles and some like directions. It's just like I just thought that was good. And I'm looking at this from like a cosplay perspective. Like if I ever wanted to cosplay this, right? Like would I like make these little like pointy triangle things near my belly button to make it look like I had
Be
amazing.
God.
Her silhouette is so specific. Yeah.
I kind of need you to do that though. Like I kind of need to see it now.
Yeah, I've seen
so cool.
I've seen people who cosplay her like do the makeup so that it looks like their necks are very thin. So they do like the black on the outside and then like the neck looks very, very thin. And then yeah, I've seen people do that and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I feel like the eyelashes would just be too heavy on the face though.
I've seen people do that too. People are talented, man. Cosplayers are talented.
They are. They really are.
They are. I guess my little fun facts about Yzma, or just like the movie in general, was that it was supposed to be a more serious movie at first. So early in the production stage, the movie was going to be called Kingdom of the Sun. And Yzma, while still the main antagonist, was going to be a necromancer, attempting to summon an inking god of darkness to block out the sun and plunge the world into eternal night. It was going to be a musical. There was going to be musical numbers, but I guess test groups did not respond to it very well. And so they really overcorrected and went this comedic route. And I'm so glad they did, because now we have the masterpiece that is Emperor's New Groove.
So funny.
It's so funny, so quotable. Like, I'm going to turn him into a flea and then put that flea inside of a box and put that box into another box. And when it arrives on my doorstep, I'll smash it with a hammer. Like,
yeah,
iconic.
And the poison for Cusco, the poison specifically chosen to kill Cusco's poison.
It's coming together. There's like, yeah, there's so much that, to me, that movie is as much of a cult classic as like Mean Girls as far as like quotability goes.
I absolutely forgot to, like, when I was rewatching it, like with the angel and the devil on the shoulder, where the devil at one point was like, okay, but like, here's my counter argument. Look what I can do. And the angel, like, he's like, no, he's got a point.
He's got a point. As he's doing handstand push-ups. Yeah. He's got a point. So funny. Apparently there is a top 30 Disney villains list, and she is ranked number 14. Maleficent was ranked number 1. I didn't go terribly through the whole list. I just saw number 14 to number 1. I don't think it's very updated. I think it's from 2004, because like modern villains like King Magnifico and I'm forgetting who else, but they're not on that list. HB and I have like a running list of villains we've talked about so far. Heather, where would you put Yzma on your list? Like, how evil of a villain is she?
I think that because she's so bad at executing her plans, I'd put her closer to the like not evil area of it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like if we're going like on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 is being like the most evil and 1 is being like not evil at all, I'd put her at like a 3.
I was thinking that too. As soon as you said on a scale of 1 to 10, I was like, yeah, she's like a 3 or 4. Yeah. I mean, like the narcissism pushes her a little closer to evil, but it's like she's just also just so bad at executing anything that it's like, you know, yeah,
get out of here.
She's a bad person, not an evil. Well, none of her plans come to fruition. So I think that helps and changes a lot of things. Who knows, if she was able to actually kill someone, maybe we'd have a different conversation. Nicole,
she's
what
one
about
of those
you?
Villains that you just wouldn't be able to take seriously.
She really,
you know, like she would say like, yep, this is my evil plan, and be like, sure, Jan.
Yeah, especially now that she's a cat.
Yeah,
is that my voice? I think that was really all the fun facts. I'll put her, she has a wiki page on the Villains fandom site, so I can link that in our show notes if anyone else is curious about some other things as far as like apparently, because there's a note here, because of her overall madness as an inspiring but also corrupt imperial ruler, she has exemplified each of the 7 deadly sins. And so you can kind of go through that. And then yeah, she doesn't like gravy, or at least foods with too much of it. She complains about such dishes when she and KRONK are at the restaurant, and she doesn't
I
like
love that
KRONK spinach
scene.
puffs.
I love the scene at the restaurant when KRONK takes over for cooking and he's living his best life. And then she and Cusco are just spinning around, like giving him orders of like, I'll take the potatoes with no cheese. Yes, with cheese, please. And then they both come in and say the same thing at the same time. And then they're like, wait, what?
What? Yeah.
Such a good scene. But I also, I almost made a note about this, but I didn't. But now that you say this about the 7 deadly sins, I love her love for dessert. It comes up so much in the movie, like really weirdly. Like her, like when they're like, we have to find him, and he's like, what about dessert? And she's like, okay, I guess there's time for dessert. And then he's like, and a cup of coffee. Yeah.
She said,
And
fine,
then
fine,
when
fine.
they're and then when they're leaving the restaurant after Cusco distracts them by making them think it's her birthday, KRONK is carrying her with like a piece of cake, and then he puts her in the little back carrier thing with the piece of cake and like throws all the food in there and zips her back up and puts him on her back. Like she still had to have the cake. Like I just love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yzma is all of us with that.
Absolutely.
Yes, I agree. I was like, this is relatable. I would also like dessert, please.
Yes. Yeah. No, she's great. She's to me a very iconic villain as far as like silly, goofy. I wonder though if that would be different if KRONK weren't her right-hand man. Like to me in my brain, Yzma and KRONK are very much a package deal. And it's their relationship that makes it so funny too, because he's just this like aloof kind of a guy and she's an asshole, you know.
Very much a buddy comedy.
It is,
yeah.
Yes, on both ends. Like you have Pacha and Cusco who are very opposite, and then KRONK and Yzma, and that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. And all of it together, I think, is like a perfect formula for comedy as well. So I think they did a really good job with the characters to make a good, funny movie.
It is really good. Fun fact, Emperor's New Groove was created and produced and designed and all that stuff in the same studio that Mulan and Lilo and Stitch were. So it was the Florida Disney animation studio that got shut down around this time. I think Emperor's New Groove, or no, because that came out in 2000. Whichever, I think Lilo and Stitch was like one of the last films. They also did Atlantis, like all of these really experimental original ideas. And then when that studio got shut down, they all went to DreamWorks. And so around the same time, then Shrek came out and blah, 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 blah. So I always think that's a really interesting fact that like these really underrated, iconic movies that we really, really love, these people went on to work for DreamWorks instead. And we got even more iconic classic movies from them. So little fun fact there. Those are all of my notes. Anything else before we wrap up?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nicole, for being here and for all of your wisdom and insight. This was so much fun. Can you tell listeners where they can find you online? And are you potentially possibly taking any clients?
So yes, first of all, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. You can find me on Instagram, as HB mentioned, at levelup_therapist. You can also find me through all social media platforms. I have another podcast called My Hero Therapy, which is all about the world of My Hero Academia and the mental health themes we see through that. You can see that at MHA podcast on all social media platforms. And as far as taking new clients, I would love to say that I am. You're welcome to call and be added to my wait list if you're in the Buffalo, New York area. I cannot promise that I'm going to be able to see you within the year. My wait list is very long. There is not many geek therapists out here in Buffalo. So because of how specialized I am, my wait list is about a year out, but you're welcome to try.
That's amazing, though. That's really cool. I love the concept of taking geeky things and using them as vehicles to support people on their mental health journey, which, you know, is part of the reason why we started this podcast. But I love that, you know, you're doing it in a helpful and clinical manner.
And I actually misspoke on the social media for the other podcast I do. It's actually at My Hero Therapy podcast.
Okay.
Got it confused.
Yeah. MHM,
All right.
MHA, My Hero Academia. Yeah, no, I get it. A lot of things. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and we will catch y'all next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mental Health Multiverse. You can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at mhm.thepodcast.
And join our Patreon for as little as $3 for bonus and additional content.
You can follow both of us on Instagram and TikTok, HB at Heather Bodie.
And me, Marissa/LB at littleben_notbroken. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with a friend.
Screenshot it and tag us on Instagram or leave us a rating or review.
Thanks again, and we'll talk to you again soon.